reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are taking a look at the Armies of Japan, doing our 3rd edition army review. Now, as a quick reminder, this is not a review of how strong the book is by comparison to other armies, how likely you are to win a game, or anything else like that, because there are too many variables to measure for that. Skill of your opponent, style of table, scenario in place, what kind of list you're using, it's just too much, okay? How well your dice roll, right? Things like that. However, it is designed to take a look at the options that are available to you and how versatile they are. Are they filling needs that you are likely to have? So as a quick reminder, we're going to be looking at 7 different categories worth of stuff. There's going to be a varying scale of how many points you can win for each one, because some of them are weighted and some of them are not weighted on account of, for example, the strength of your assault infantry is not actually as important as the strength of your supporting fire infantry in 3rd edition, because assault has taken a bit more of a backseat, though Japan might change that. We'll see. More on that when we get into it. I don't want to jump into too much of it now. But just suffice it to say, the way that we set it up, it comes out to a possible 100 points. It is very unlikely that anybody's going to get exactly 100 points. And so, I think currently the highest we've had so far in our series is Great Britain at 76. So, again, it's not like everybody's going to be excellent in every single category. But each nation's going to have hopefully the things that they're really good at in enough places that they'll be able to finish really well. And so, with no further ado, we'll jump in and see how Japan is doing. Beginning first with the special rules and the subtypes that are available to them. And so to lead off with, we have Death Before Dishonor, which gives our guys, the fanatic special rule if they're infantry or artillery. So anything that involves physical dudes that are outside of vehicles. They will all start with a fanatic rule for free. This is typically a 2-point upgrade on every single one of them, and you're getting all of that for free, which is awesome. In addition, it also guarantees that they pass tank assaults, though admittedly, obviously, if a tank overruns an artillery piece, even if the crew survives, which is what passing that tank assault would mean, the gun itself will still be run over because they're very heavy and they're hard to get out of the way of things, and the tank will just crush it, such is the nature of things with the poundage of everything involved. I'm ranking this as excellent. I mean, again, the fact that you're getting so much value for free in a game that stripped away so many free units and other stuff from the game is really, really good. Right? But more than that, it's the kind of thing you could lean into very easily. Fanatics means you are likely to be able to play with basically all the models that you bring on the table. It's not quite as good at kind of encouraging that as last edition. We talked about this in the Fanatics video, how last edition it was just, you don't flee the battlefield until you are down to, less than 2 men, so down to 1 man or completely removed. Now you just have to perform the order test. So obviously if you're running people at a lower rating, even though you're not counting pins, an inexperienced unit with Fanatics is still looking for an 8. That means they have a 1 in 6 chance of failing. Units that are looking for a 9 or a 10, etc., it's going to be the way that it is, right? Where it's still possible to be able to fail. And even if you were a regular unit in range of a platoon commander giving you a morale of 11, you might still fail because you roll boxcars and roll a 12. Right. So it isn't quite as good as last edition, but I still think it's really good. Right. And so I have no problem giving it an excellent rating. Bonsai is, first of all, better than it is in the rulebook here in the new book. And so, all of the infantry that are within 6 inches of an officer, and that is to say, unlike a normal snap 2, this will affect all of them. So it's not just the 2 or the 4 that you're used to doing with every other nation, 3 to 5 in the case of regular and veteran German officers. All of the infantry within 6 inches of an officer will assault without an order test. And they do clarify this. We also just got a clarification in the FAQ, which is one of the things I was waiting for before recording this video. Was making sure that we have whatever the opening day FAQs are in. And so you should see all of those. It does guarantee, this basically just means literally all infantry. They could have the fixed keyword, and even though in 3rd edition that means they're not generally allowed to assault, these men still will assault, even though they have the fixed keyword. It also means you don't get a choice. They will assault. Now, there are some ways to game this. So, for example, if your assault units are all tied to the Special Naval Landing Force, or SNLF, which are basically just Japanese Marines, if they're being led by an SNLF officer, the SNLF officers can only affect SNLF units. So you could, for example, have a supporting fire unit that has taken IJA for the Imperial Japanese Army, and they would not assault, because they aren't allowed to be given orders by an SNLF officer because of the bitter rivalry. So, like, there are technically some ways to game it, but in general, it means when you decide to pop that snap to and declare Banzai, make sure you're okay with everybody in range assaulting. Now, it's also worth noting, this is not full unit control over assaulting. And I suspect the order in which you end up resolving these is also going to matter, because the rule for Banzai is they have to assault the closest visible enemy unit, which means if they would have to assault a unit that would pull them out of range of an objective, they will have to chase that unit and thus potentially leave the objective. So you need to be careful of this. Secondly, if the closest enemy unit is in rough ground, you could be throwing a lot of bodies against a unit that is going to chop up a bunch of your men, and then hopefully you're able to beat them in close combat. But because of the size of a lot of the units in question, the infantry squads, of course, can get up to like 15 to 18 men, but a lot of the team weapons are between 2 and 4, maybe 5 men. It's possible you may not have Fanatic by the end of the first round of close combat. And thus, you may not get to say, aha, we keep going and I have another chance of removing models. And especially if that unit is a Soviet body armor wearing unit, taken veteran, where you're looking for 6s, you could be throwing away an awful lot of bodies to do absolutely nothing. Okay? So just know, Banzai is not a bad special rule. It's a very good special rule, but I'm not going to call it an excellent special rule because it does have limitations, healthy limitations, by the way, that I think allow for better tactical gameplay. From a game building perspective, I think this is excellent. I think it's very well done, no notes. I think this is exactly how I would write it. But I don't think it's as excellent as Fanatics. Okay, I'm not going to rank it quite as high as Death Before Dishonor. I do think it's good. We then also get lack of radios. This allows you, if you want to pass on paying the 10 points to add command vehicle to one of your vehicles in the slot, so that you can instead just reduce the range on the morale bubble and snap to benefits and stuff like that to a 6-inch range instead of a 12-inch range. Now, personally, I think this is average. On the one hand, it is sometimes nice to be able to spread out your armor a little bit more to contest multiple objectives while still having them not only snappable by your armor platoon commander, but also to have that extra morale bubble, because you don't have an infinite number of morale bubbles, right? You have to decide where you want them on the battlefield. On the other hand, there's a decent number of times where you're going to be running your armor pretty close to each other anyway, because they're not particularly durable. So giving each other a heavy cover save by running them relatively close together is really nice. And so lack of radios doesn't hurt you, right? In fact, if anything, it just says, okay, well, if we're not going to be as far out as 12 inches from each other, might as well just shrink the bubble back down to 6 and save us 10 points, right? It's not a dramatic savings, but it can add up, right? Especially if you have multiple armor platoons in question. I don't think we're going to see that very often from Japan, because their armor, as you'll soon see, is not their strongest set. But I mean, hypothetically, you can run more than one, and if that's the case, you could save this multiple times, and that's not horrible. On the other hand, as I'm thinking through things with Japan, one of their best armored vehicles already has command vehicle. So it's possible you may not use the special rule, not because you don't think it's useful, not because it doesn't fit your strategy, but just because you took another tank option that already has the command vehicle, and it's actually a pretty good tank option because of how it's kitted out and relatively unique in how it's kitted out. So I'm just going to call it average, because I think it's fine. I think it's fine. For some people, it's going to be great. For some people, it's going to be useless. It's really all going to depend on what's most important to you and how you're building your army. And that brings us now to the subtypes, the Yamato Damashi. And we've got 4 types here. So continuing in the strain of not everybody only gets 3, like we saw with the Germans and the Americans. And the first is the Special Naval Landing Force. SNLF can be given to any unit that has the ability to take it, which is a good number of team weapons, not all of them. More on that a little bit later. It is a good number of the support teams, but not quite all of them. More on that later. And a few, but not all of the artillery options, including, by the way, all of the howitzer options do get access to SNLF, which is relatively rare because most Marine-style units don't get access to medium or heavy artillery, which is kind of cool. And if you take these guys veteran, you can pay +1 point per man to give them iron discipline, which is the same as the benefit that the British Guards get, which we were really big on in the British book. So they get to remove 2 pins every time that they pass an order test instead of one. I'm ranking this as good. One, because it's nice that you can get access to SNLF because thanks to bitter rivalry, it means that you can take your officers 5 points cheaper, and they only affect SNLF units. So you can run quite a few SNLF units while getting a slight reduction on the cost of your officer. It is also nice, as you'll soon see, officers are a little bit cheaper now for Japan than they were before. So all of this is really good. If you want to get any benefit from it, and admittedly spend points on it as well, you do have to take them veteran. So there is kind of a higher tax than we saw for the excellent rating that we had on the guard subtype for the British, where you can take them regular or veteran. So I think good is a fine way to rate it. I think it is helpful. I think it's nice. I'm not sure we're going to see it used outside of just, well, I want these to be snappable by an SNLF officer very often. So I think good is a good rating for it. It is nice to have. It is useful, but it's not like crazy good. On the flip side, we have the paratroopers upgrade, and this thing I am rating as excellent. It allows your veterans, which are units that you would want close up in range to the enemy because they can take a little more of a beating, who have fanatics, which is excellent, obviously not getting stubborn, which is typically the rule given to paratroopers because we already have fanatics, and fanatics is just a better version of stubborn. That is typically more expensive. And so instead, paratroopers upgrade gets the tough fighter special rule for 1 extra point. And if you've played bolt action, you are already aware that veteran plus tough fighters plus fanatics is like the best combination you can possibly have for an assault unit. And more than that, most people, if they want to try to get this, let's say you're a Waffen SS unit, for example, for the Germans, and you want to be able to get this, you have to take 4 points worth of submachine guns, 6 points worth of assault rifle, though at that point you might as well just go 4 points worth of submachine gun if you're worrying about assault, plus 2 more points worth of fanatic, plus 13 points worth of veteran. You're looking at a 19-point infantry model per model in order to get this bonus. And for the Japanese, you're looking at 13 points plus 1 point for the paratrooper upgrade, and fanatics is free. So you're looking at 14 points per model for a veteran fanatic tough fighter model, which is awesome. And more than that, you can get these in relatively big squads, okay? You can also take these now on team weapons in case you want to be like, are you absolutely sure you want to charge this position? There's 4 or 5 of us here. More on that in a little bit. Are you sure you want to come after us? Oh, and because we're sitting in a ruin shooting at you with our machine gun, like the guys over there on your left-hand side, we're going to be hitting you first. And then you can fight back with whatever remains, right? It could be disgustingly gross from an assault perspective, both to do area denial by saying, if you want to assault, please feel free, by all means, throw bodies against my unit. I can take this all day. But it can also be a really good way of clearing units out, right? Without necessarily having to go the engineering route or doing stuff like that. This could be very, very efficient and at a highly nice price point. This is a really good cost for the value that you're getting. Your veteran jungle fighters, I'm going to rank as average, similar to what I did with the Chindits. This is literally the same as the Chindits rule, where they get options. There are 3 parts to this, so it's a 3-point upgrade, even though you can only take advantage of 2 of them. So personally, I wish it was only a 2-point upgrade. It would be at least good, if not excellent, if it had 2 points cost instead of 3 points cost. But the way this works is simple. You can either avoid the penalty for coming in from outflank, which is great. You gain the Fieldcraft special rule, which is always good. We love Fieldcraft because it allows you to be able to get your mobility where you want to. You can replace the need to take an entire transport, which is really nice. And it does mean that you can maneuver in and out of ruins and forests really well. So you can get to cover very, very easily, even if it's a little bit further away than you would normally like. And then the third one is that if you do start deployed on the table, you can start the game in ambush, which could be really nice for the supporting fire units, AT rifles, machine guns, things like that, big squads that have machine guns in them, stuff like that, which is really nice. And so, the price point is a little pricey, right? Especially if you're going with something like a squad, right? Where you're paying for like at least 5 dudes. Like that's a lot in order to drop in there for some bonuses that have utility. They are a niche and they could be useful, but may not always be useful. So I'm going to rank it as average, and I think that's fine. And then you have home defense. Now, home defense, I think, is designed to be a little more of a thematic thing. It's designed to be more of like a, hey, especially if you're playing a narrative event, this is to represent the people who are being levied at the very last moment in order to come and help. It's basically kind of like green, except that there's a chance that they might randomly charge. And there's obviously still a chance that they might take a bunch of pins. Like, so it's basically like green, but not really. It has positives, it has negatives. I think it's fine. It's free. I think that's the biggest thing. You're not paying points for it. So because I don't want to rank it poor, because even if you get something negative, the positives that you get you didn't pay anything for. So I'm trying to be fair with it. I think average is a fine place to put it. I don't have a problem doing that. And so starting off with 6 points, which is about average for what we've seen so far. The British were a little bit further ahead at this point in the ranking. So far, they are keeping up with everybody else. And when looking at headquarters, we've seen a bump, and a pretty substantial bump from last edition. So first of all, from an officer perspective, this is excellent. Not only do you get all levels of officers, you also now get them at all veterancies. You can take inexperienced officers, which is accurate, by the way. Near the end of the war, there were people who had not gone through extensive training with, good field experience that were suddenly finding themselves leading units, especially of people who were recently conscripted. So I don't have a problem with there being inexperienced officers. I think that's great. The fact that you can take an SNLF officer to take another 5 points off of whatever you're paying for this officer is really, really good. 10 points off, I believe, for a company commander, which is also really good. You can only take a maximum of 2 submachine guns. So that's something worth noting. This is not a way to be able to drop a big SMG squad into your units and into your army, okay? You do get access to things like the Shingonzo sword. And so, you can take a sword on your leader, which is always nice. They also get access to the battle flag. Battle flag is kind of nice because, again, it gives you that +1 morale bonus. It's useful. Relatively expensive, but now that you could take an inexperienced officer, it's not nearly so bad as it would have been otherwise. So there's that. And then there's the signaling bugle. And the signaling bugle is interesting, and I could definitely see it having uses in some cases. In case you're not familiar with the signaling bugle, basically the way it works is when a unit activates, if it can't see the signaling bugle, so the best thing to do would be like hide it way on your side of the board, like behind a forest in a corner where nobody can see it, period. If they can't see it, then if they have to perform anything involving their morale, they treat their morale as a -1. Is basically how it works. And I think it's fine. There are obviously going to be ways around this, most notably, of course, if it's Japanese on Japanese. If you're calling bonsai, then it's automatic. You don't have to make a roll. So, you're not going to be able to stop the bonsai charges with that. In general, passing order tests, especially when you have so many morale bubbles, and if people are smart on where they place things like company commanders, morale bubbles tend to be pretty perfunctory anyway. But it does mean that if you're throwing pins down range to try to, for example, hold down enemy armor, this could be a great way of dealing with enemy armor and helping out with that, because bugle. Okay. I am kind of on the fence on it. Again, I'm still giving the officers an excellent rating. I think, fanatic officers that give you a nice bump, that can be cheaper, that have access to some useful tools are nice. I will probably not be using the signaling bugle all that much, personally, both because I think for some people it can grow tiresome and it can feel uncool to them, and it can remove some of the fun. Also, there are quite a few ways for you to be able to try to get the bugle out, especially in case you're doing full deployment. You want to deploy the bugle so you can use it as early as turn 1. And then somebody puts out their infiltrators, and they find a way to put infiltrators in such a way that they'll be able to see you and try to remove you as early as possible. So, I think it can be useful. I think all of this stuff is good, and I think this is a really, really good officer section, if for no other reason than they're all fanatic for free, right? But I'm not sure that the signaling bugle is going to be massive. I don't think it needs to be removed from the game. I don't think it needs to be nerfed. I think it's fine for what it is. It just means you're going to have to play with a slightly different strategy or take on more risk, is all it means. Your medics are great. You get access to regular and veteran medics. Again, nothing special and awe-inspiring. None of your subtypes really help your medics. So in that sense, it's not quite as good maybe as some of the American or even the British medics, but I think they're fine. Your forward observers are excellent, which is not something I was expecting to say. They don't have any special rules that help out the forward observers, other than obviously the fact that they're a fanatic. Instead, the big thing about this is that in the research that they did for the book, they discovered that that kind of medium build plane, kind of that combo hybrid style attack craft, they didn't really have any of those. So what they did was they said, well, we're going to change the chart for these. So now on a 1 through 3, you get the strafing fighter. And on a 4 through 6, you get the big ground attack vehicle. And then they reduced the cost by 33%. So you're down to like 50 points and like 65 points, 60 points, for the veteran one, which is really, really good for two reasons. One, that's a 50-point air observer, right? I mean, even if it gets driven off, you were paying the same points as you paid for a machine gun team. That's not bad at all. And especially since you couldn't be doing a whole lot more pins in one turn than a machine gun team might do for its entire lifetime over the course of the game. Second, and more than that, out of all the planes they could have removed, they removed the worst plane, okay? Because either you want 2d6 pen plus 2 hits done against the top armor, because that's a great way of trying to remove those really light armored vehicles. DV7s, especially DV7s open topped, are really, really, really fragile against those because you're getting pen plus 2 plus 1 for the top becomes pen plus 3. And anything that does glancing or full damage, you get a plus 1 to the result on, right? For whatever the damage result is. So now you're looking at a 5 plus to set it on fire on a glance. You're looking at a 3 plus to destroy it outright on a full. And so, new incoming Japanese air observer meta? Question mark? Not something I expected to see. So if you're looking at buying maybe some Blood Red Skies models to use as your quick, it's, it looks small because it's so way up high, right? Sort of models. Or if you want to buy some, I think 148 Tamiya, I think they make some Japanese fighters and stuff like that. Like, go pick up some fighter planes. These things are really good. And I could see people doing double rifle, double recce platoons just to run quad Japanese air observers. Because they could be very, very cheap and very easy, especially if you have reason to believe you're going to activate really early in a turn on account of the fact that you have so many order dice. More on that when we get to team weapons. Chaplains, they don't get any options, so we have to rank it with a +0. I will note in passing that there was a book that was released in 1997, which had a number of comments made by members of the Japanese community from the time, called Zen at War. And the book Zen at War catalogs the thought processes of kind of two different schools of thought as regards the Zen Buddhist monks of the time during the 1930s and the 1940s, where one of them has been referred to as, kind of Buddhism subservient to the state, where they were very much in favor of the war. It was necessary. And Buddhist monks would go over with the army to perform chaplain-style roles. Okay. There was another school of thought at the time that said, no, this is actually not what Buddhism is. This stands antithetical to what we're doing. And the two have had arguments and disagreements over the years. The result is, regardless of where you fall on that whole side of the spectrum, I feel like it would be fine for Japan to have a Buddhist monk option. And it just literally is a chaplain. That's all it is. It's just a chaplain unit. I don't think it would overpower Japan to have one. But I'm just noting in passing that there were Buddhist monks who filled a chaplain role who went over with the IJA, and I'm just going to leave it there. So, if Warlord wants to add that as a future option, I think maybe it would be fine for them to do so. They'll score an extra point or two on this rating because it'll at least be good if they get one. Because if nothing else, it's a fanatic chaplain, which is great. Actually, no, it wouldn't be because he'd only be one dude. So never mind. Unless you got a special rule that says he's always fanatic because, his faith stirs him to greater acts of brilliance or something like that. And then we have the political officers. These guys are awesome. Not only is the Kempetai officer cheap, right? I mean, it's a 21-point order dice, so more expensive than previous editions, okay? Because I think they were as low as 15 points at one point. But at the same time, he gives your guys the potential for re-rollable order tests, which is phenomenally good, especially if you're like, well, I really don't want these guys to bonsai charge. I would prefer them to do something else. So I want to activate them. But, they've got some pins on them, and I prefer they do something. It is really nice that you could be like, well, let's try to make some of this stuff more rerollable, which is great. And they also allow you to reroll your green test. Now, this is less powerful than it was last edition when you pass a green on a 5+, and you get your negative pins on a 1. Now, it's just as much a chance that you uprate as you do when you roll a 1. But that still makes the reroll really good because now it means that if you do get a 1, you have a second chance to not get a 1. And on that second roll, you could still get a 1, but you're just as likely to uprate instead. And so because of that, I think these are great. You can also take this guy as a Special Naval Landing Force political officer. They can benefit from the SNLF side of things, which is really great. And so I think this is really awesome. And coming in with 10 out of a possible 13 points is really not that bad, especially since, again, they had to take a 0 in 1 because they didn't get access to chaplains. So Japan, off to a strong start. And as we go into infantry, unsurprisingly, a really good start because they all get Fanatic for free, right? So your supporting fire units are excellent. You get access to light machine guns. You get access to knee mortars, which are relatively expensive at like 25 points per man. But they only have a 6-inch minimum range, which means if somebody's getting underneath of the gun, so to speak, to get to within your minimum range with the knee mortar, they're at the distance where you could just say, okay, we're going to charge you. And they can't shoot at you in response because you're too close. You're at point blank range already, right? And so, if they're within 6 inches, you are not allowed to react with firing at them. And so if they want to try to avoid the mortar, and it still has the full 36-inch range, it's a 36-inch to 6-inch, which is crazy good. I'm still not a big fan of light mortars myself. I wouldn't personally run these, but if one has to run these, and if one is looking to run them as supporting fire units, the knee mortar is a fantastic way to do it, okay? Also, because of the fact that these guys are fanatics, even if you only take them as a 5 or 6 man squad, they're really sticky. They will stick around for a long time. And the enemy can't just say, well, I'm just going to throw a ton of pins at them and panic them off the table. They'd have to throw a ton of pins at them and hope that you don't rally. Because you could have 2 million pins on a single unit, and they won't run off the table for having exceeded their morale. Because fanatics, which is really nice. From an assault perspective, in a game where assault is not that great, these guys are actually really good. You get the tough fighters plus fanatics combo on both cavalry and paratroopers, which is really, really good. Most people don't even get this combo, period. If they do, they're paying through the nose. You're not paying nearly as much because you're saving 2 points per man on the cost for fanatics. And in the case of the paratroopers and the cavalry, you're not having to pay 4 points for a submachine gun. You're paying 3 points to get added mobility, the recce rule, and tough fighters. And with paratroopers, you're just paying the 1 point to get tough fighters. And then, to be honest, you probably want to buy yourself a transport. Okay, so there's kind of a hidden cost that comes with paratroopers, but more on that when we get to transports a little bit later, because it's not as big of a hidden cost as you think it is. Next, we have the engineers. Engineers is the one that kind of lets us down, and I feel bad about that. It's the only one that didn't get an excellent rating, okay? And the reason why I couldn't give it to them is because you can only take 1 submachine gun. And it's worth noting, they have 2 engineering units. One of the engineering units, not that good, which is just a general engineer. If you don't like flamethrowers, it's fine. They're great. And you can run them in a lot of different ways. I think even the Special Naval Landing Force, the SNLF, can run those engineers. But it's worth noting, if you want the flamethrower in the unit, you can't take the general engineer squad. You have to take the pioneer squad. The regular engineer squad only gets the light machine gun option. They don't get the light machine gun and the option for a flamethrower. Flamethrower pioneer section does not get access to SNLF. In fact, they don't get access to any of the Yamato, is it Shamati? Let's see, hold on. Let me remind myself. Yamato Damashi, that's right. They don't get access to the Yamato Damashi options at all. None of them. So just keep in mind, these guys are straight IJA. That's all that they are. You do get access to the flamethrower, but it's a flamethrower escorted by 1 submachine gun. And even the Americans were looking pretty light at only 3 submachine guns. Okay? The overwhelming majority of people who can run a flamethrower, which has that only 6-inch range, they can stack a lot of submachine guns in that same unit so that the volume when they're firing with the flamethrower is really, really good. Japanese volume isn't going to be nearly as good, mostly because, again, a lot of their bonuses, one, this is historically accurate. The Japanese did not use a lot of submachine guns. But secondly, a lot of where they've been built into focus is to be able to use cheap, inexpensive kit like rifles, for example, and to be able to perform assault maneuvers, right? But what it means is, as a trade-off to that, the Pioneer section kind of takes a dive because of that. So I don't think it's quite as good as other engineers from other armies. Yes, Fanatic is great. That's not going to actually fulfill the role that engineers are designed to do particularly well. So I will call it good. If you want to run Pioneers and Engineers with Japan, more on that when we get to the armored vehicles as to one of the reasons why an engineering platoon is still a really good idea, you can. They're not the greatest engineers out there. They're not even among the top tier of the engineers out there, but they are good for what they're designed to do. Your mounted troops are excellent. Not only because you get cavalry who can combine tough fighters with fanatics taken at regular or veteran, which is awesome. In addition, and I don't rep these all that often, You can take bicycles. Now, we did a whole video as part of our 7-part transport series talking about bicycles and other stuff like, like cavalry and motorcycles and stuff. And the bicycles was a relatively short version because the simple answer is there are some boards where bicycles will not make a difference. You're going to pay 1 point per man for no bonus because they did not include roads. Okay? But there are going to be some cases where bicycles are really great. And one of the caveats we made about how great bicycles can be is that unlike motorcycles, there is no rule in the bolt action rulebook that says you cannot perform an assault while on a bicycle. And there's no rule saying you have to dismount your bicycle in order to perform a close combat attack. Now, what it means is you you have to perform a run order, and again, you lose the bicycles if you perform any order that is not a run order, okay, including an advance order, which means when you perform an assault, you have not yet lost the bicycles. It means if you want to get any bonus from riding the bicycles, you have to start completely on a road, and you have to end completely on a road. But depending on the map you're playing on, especially if you're playing in one of those beautiful urban maps where you've got roads everywhere connecting a bunch of the different houses and stuff, you can get a 24-inch assault with Tough Fighter Fanatic paratroopers for only 1 point per man. Paid for those extra bicycles. The bicycle gives you a potential at a 24-inch assault, which is crazy. That is half of the board across. That is a third of the board long. The reach on these is insanely good. I'm not saying you should be taking bicycles. I'm saying you might consider trying them. And I am going to, because I feel like maybe there's a new bicycle meta to accompany the Air Observer meta, where you strafe everybody with a bunch of pins, and then you go careening into them from an ungodly distance on a bonsai charge. And people look down the board being like, how did you make it here as early as the beginning of turn 2? How is that possible? And the answer is bicycles. More on that in a future video. I might even build a battle report around it so you can see it in action. Who knows? And then we have our unique specialists. Okay, these are excellent. You have things like your paratroopers, your grenadiers, your infiltrators of various kinds. Lots of different types of infiltrator units, ranging from small hit squads to slightly larger squads that have a little more meat to them and a little more and can take a little more punishment. There's a lot of different play styles that you can do using Japanese infantry. And so, with 15 out of 16 points, almost a perfect score, Japan is looking really, really strong, only being down 8 points total in the entire ranking so far. And when looking at team weapons, we get a perfect score, a 13 out of 13. And as soon as I opened up the book and saw one thing, I immediately knew this is how it was going to score. And I knew that there was no way that they were going to lose it. And here's the reason why. Because you have the ability to add extra crew, 2 to 3 men typically, to basically all of these. You can't add them to the lunge mines. You can't have 2 or 3 lunge mines running around with an extra 5 points per man. But the fact that you can have a 5-man machine gun team, the fact that you can have a 4-man flamethrower team, the fact that you can have a 4-man anti-tank rifle team, right? Like the fact that you can take extra people means that these things that are supposed to be typically sitting back or pushing up aggressively against the enemy, the fact that they can have a little more durability while also being fanatic means these guys, they can hold objectives for you in ways that others of a similar kind cannot. Furthermore, they're missing a lot of the traps, right? So, you've got your, medium machine gun team. You don't have a heavy machine gun team, which I feel like they might have had some of those closer to like 50 caliber sort of things. I don't know the Japanese military as well as I should. Maybe what some people classify as a heavy machine gun is just what bolt action would classify as a medium machine gun, a 30 caliber equivalent. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the fact that you can have a 5-man crew that's sitting at under 80 points, that's all veteran, manning a machine gun is really, really good. You can take all of the different types, all veterancies for all the mortars. They're all fanatics, which is really great. You can add extra crew to all of them, so you can have a really durable unit. It is worth noting for all of the SNLF guys that are thinking about SNLF, you cannot take heavy mortars. That's SNLF. So if you want to be able to snap 2 heavy mortars hit your enemy, you are going to have to take the officer snapping them too. You're going to have to take him IJA. Okay, so you are going to have to pay the extra 5 points. You are going to have to do that. But again, you could take him in experience. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Okay, but again, all the mortars, and the mortars are great, and they're all fanatics, which is awesome. Your AT teams are limited to AT rifle teams, which are fantastic already. They were already in the good category just for having them. And then you also have anti-tank mines, which are phenomenally good. Not only because they're so cheap for the ability to knock out really, really good armor, not only because they can automatically charge and successfully pass order tests with Bonsai in case they've got a bunch of pins stacked on them, but also because currently, and it hasn't been errated with the new errata, they don't count against you for order dice removed. They do count for you for the purpose of how many order dice you put in the bag, but they don't count against you for seek and destroy style missions, which is really, really good. Your sniper teams are also excellent, both because you get access to Fieldcraft innately, so you're sitting on 54 points regular instead of 52 points regular, and 69 points veteran instead of 67. And yet, at the same time, you also get access to a marksman. So you can take them as a one-man unit, which is dramatically cheaper. He can have a rifle, or you can give this guy, as a lone sniper, a light machine gun. I personally don't like the light machine gun because you're suffering a -1 to hit on account of the fact that you don't have an extra man helping you. And as far as I can tell, you don't get the sniper keyword because it's not listed in his special rules, which means you're not ignoring all of the cover. You're not ignoring other hit modifiers, which means if you start taking pins, you're obviously going to get the pin thing. But any other modifiers that might apply to you, you will also suffer. So again, I want to like the lone sniper. If the lone sniper with the light machine gun could avoid the -1 to hit for not having the extra man in his team, that would be fantastic. As far as I know, they were kind of trained and they did practice firing all by themselves, so I wouldn't personally have a problem with removing it. But yeah, I mean, whatever. Again, they have options, and at the very least, these options combining Fanatic in the vast majority of cases. Lone Sniper doesn't get Fanatic because he has less than one dude. Well, he has less than two guys. But the fact that they're combining that with Fieldcraft already makes them a really, really good choice because it makes them highly mobile. You can put them very easily in terrain, and then you can move them around in and out of terrain in case things get really tough and you need to be able to redeploy in ways that other people cannot do, which is awesome. Your flamethrower teams. This is actually a really exciting one, and one of the two contributing reasons to why you should consider running an engineering platoon. The first one is that you can take an extra 2 guys, which means you could take this as 4-man regulars just at 60 points, which is not bad. They use their flamethrower, and then after that, they can still continue fighting for you, and they're a 4-man fanatic unit, which is great. But if you take them veteran, not only are you very unlikely to lose the team, you are very likely to be quite dangerous up close once you lose the flamethrower and you start running into people, because you are actually quite difficult to remove. And you can get the tough, they get the tough fighter bonus. You can give them a tough fighter bonus. You can take these guys with a tough fighter bonus, which is really great. So I see them as something of a multi-tool. There might be an engineering meta coming for Japan. You can run an engineering crew and actually do pretty well in a lot of ways with these, which is awesome. And then finally, for their special weapon teams, they're excellent. They get an anti-infantry lunge mine unit as well. So instead of doing the pen +8 hit against an armored vehicle, they instead do 2d6 small arms hits against whatever softer target they ran into. Now, keep in mind, this means on average, that's 7 hits. You might roll below average, but you might roll above average. 7 hits on average is 2 wounds against a veteran unit, and could be 3. And if you roll out of the box, it could be more than that, right? And if you're removing 2 to 3 veterans for 20 points regular, 26 points veteran, you're removing at least your own value. And if you're going after anything that isn't veteran, you're doing on average somewhere between 3 to 6 wounds, which is well more and sometimes double what you're currently paying for yourself. And if you only paid 14 points to take it in experience, then literally anything you remove, you're getting good value out of. And again, they didn't get any order dice kills for removing you. No points for that. So, I mean, that's substantial. And so I have no problem giving them a perfect rating as regards their team weapons, because they're very well built and the army is very well made in order to really take advantage of that. And so I think we're going to see a lot of team weapons being used by Japanese. And as we go into artillery, this is also a pretty good score. You've got excellent howitzers. Not only do you get all types, all veteran seats, you get quite a bit of variety. You get some that can double as light AT guns, admittedly with only like a pen +3. They also only get like a 1-inch HE template in some cases with the battalion guns. So like if you're running it that way, it means you might not have a very good high explosive damage, so you're really more in the AT gun category than you are elsewhere, but you're cheaper, which is also nice. And so we love those. You get access to Spigot Mortar. Spigot Mortar has a 4-inch HE template, but it only does a pen +1 instead of doing the pen +4 that's typically associated with that template. Again, I mean, it's a big mortar. It's a relatively cheap big mortar, which is nice, and it has a really wide area. So if you have multiples of these, like the amount of models you could be covering on turns where you're hitting with these could be really, really big. You're getting fanatics, which is great, and you can add 2 crew to all of these things, which is really good. Your anti-tank guns are good, mostly because you're getting access to light, medium, and heavy stuff. You also do have access to a versatile heavy anti-tank gun, so you can get a little bit of additional options for dealing with threats, which is nice. They get fanatic. You can take extra people. All of that's really good, right? So I don't have a problem giving them a good rating. I don't think it's excellent. I think you could spend your points better elsewhere, like on the howitzers, for example. But I think that in general, this is really solid. And then for your AA guns, these are excellent. You can take twin light autocannons with the IJA, and with the SNLF, you can take triple light autocannons, which is also really good. You also do get access to technically a medium howitzer with the flak rule. And I wanted to park here because a lot of people aren't going to talk about this, both because a lot of people don't like howitzers. I really like howitzers, so I'm going to talk about it. But also because your chances of hitting with this are relatively low. But realize that if you were to run this, one, it's a cheap medium howitzer. It's very cheap. It's cheaper than running a normal medium howitzer, mostly because you don't have to pay for the gun shield, which is really nice. But second, and more than that, and this is the big thing, since it has the flak rule, you are only getting 1 shot. And that means you're hitting on 5s or 6s if you have a pin, which is not great odds. However, if you do hit, per the rules for how HE shots work, the way HE works is that the number of hits you do to aircraft is equal to how many hits you would do to a building. And a medium howitzer does 2d6 hits against a building, which means on average, if you were to hit with this, on average, that is 7 hits. That will down any aircraft that we have seen so far in the game, and I have reason to believe that is not about to change. So while I'm not saying you should be running the medium howitzer AA gun, I'm saying if you do choose to run it, and if you can keep the pins off of it, and you can keep it firing and providing shots down range, you might find it's a really useful tool against enemy infantry. It's a reasonable tool for putting D3 pins on enemy armor, and it might be a really, really fun, almost cheesy way of driving off an entire enemy swarm of aircraft, which is really good. And then as regards to your machine guns, they're good. I mean, nothing really, really big to write home about. You get a heavy machine gun AA gun for 95 points. You can take it up to 5 crew for 105 points. It's a lot of shots against aircraft. It's a double heavy machine gun, so that's 12 shots against infantry, which is really, really good. Again, I don't know, man. Like it is cheaper by a good bit than the American M51. So in that sense, you can't really, sneer at that. I think my biggest issue is just there's so many things I would love to spend my points on at 95 to 105 points already with Japan that I'm not sure I need a machine gun oriented AA gun. So that's the only thing that I'm thinking there. As we move into Japanese armor support, this is where the trade-off comes. Okay, to be fair, and before we go into this, this discussion, to be historically accurate, you have to understand that the Empire of Japan was in a really tight spot when it came to steel production. Okay. Remember that they did not have a lot of innate steel production innate within the Japanese islands at the scale that you would need for a modern war. And so when the IJA comes knocking saying, hey, we need tanks, that way we can conduct ground operations, and the Navy's saying, hey, we need ships so that we can get things to do land operations and to help reinforce defenses we already have, and the Air Force is saying, hey, we want to do cover fire and support for both our land forces and our Navy, which includes multiple aircraft carriers and battleships. There's a lot of needs going all around. And one of the considerations that was made very early on was, okay, so do we invade, deeper into Asia and go after steel production there? Or do we invade the Dutch East Indies and go after the steel and oil production there? And the decision that was made was to go after the Dutch East Indies. And what that meant, practically speaking, is if you were going for a land invasion, the IJA, the Japanese army, was likely to be the one that was going to be favored as regards what they needed, because again, that's what was going to help them procure more resources. Whereas if it's in the Dutch East Indies and it's island hopping, the steel is going to end up going to the Navy, and that's exactly what happened. So realize that the amount of steel they have to work with is already pretty limited. Okay. Factor into this the fact that you've got a lot of mountainous terrain. You have to be able to conduct beach landings. A lot of what they're designing, bigger, bulkier tanks, are just not going to work. Okay. So what we should expect to see is really, really light armored vehicles, which in bolt action, by the way, generally tend to perform pretty well. I'm going to be giving a lot of these ratings of good, poor, and average, though. And the reason why is because, well, I think they're fine. They're not great. So for starters, the actual tanks, I'm going to rank as good. You have some that are really good options. The damage value 8s can be really good for tank dueling, especially the Kaishinoto. The Shuki tank as well is also really good because it gets a hull-mounted light AT gun, which, even though that means it has to fire forward to fire against enemy armor, that's probably the side you want facing enemy armor anyway. And in the turret, it's just a machine gun, which means that if you've got enemy infantry trying to flank around you, you can swivel that around and shoot at them while still keeping your most durable side facing toward enemy armor, which is likely where some of their bigger weapons are going to be coming from. And so that's quite advantageous. It also comes innately with the command vehicle upgrade. They also did fix it. The price cost that you see in the printed book that you received in the mail is for inexperienced and regular, not regular and veteran. If it was regular and veteran, this would be excellent purely for the Shuki command vehicle, and that's the only vehicle you should be running, to be completely honest. If you can pay 108 points to get a tank that other people would be paying like 125 points for, that's fantastically good value. But yeah, I mean, I think that one's really good to run. It means that, again, because it's a command vehicle, suddenly your need for the radios thing, the radio special rule, goes away, because you really don't need to worry about it because you've got a command vehicle in there, right? So it's kind of a non-issue for those ones, and that's that third category that I was talking about earlier. But just suffice it to say, you've got a lot of cheap armor options, right? A lot of DV7 and DV8 trying to punch at their value, sometimes higher than their value. You also have quite a bit of weak sides. Things like the Keto and the Ego both have weak sides, which on DV7 and DV8 style stuff is not always that good. Admittedly, a weak sides DV7 is still better than a DV6 because you get the armored vehicle charts for damage instead of just being destroyed in case you get hit from there. But it does mean that these things, they can fold pretty easily if they get hit by something serious, okay? You also, and this is one of the unfortunate things that drags down the tanks, because of the fact that they knew that they were doing a lot of, relatively tight warfare and they wanted to be able to run, high explosive sort of stuff, you have a lot of howitzers and a few less of the AT guns. And actually, a lot of the AT guns are actually low velocity AT guns. So they're only getting pen plus 3 instead of getting pen plus 4. The result is, I think they're fine. I don't think that they're particularly great. I know some people really like the Hago. I don't like crapping on the Chiha. The Chiha's great. And if the Chiha was a self-propelled gun, it would perform really well. But it's not. It is quite clearly a tank. It has too many machine guns to simply be a self-propelled gun. And so I think I have to give these guys a good rating. It's not excellent. They're not horrible. And I think there is a place for Japanese running armor. Their tankets and some of those DV7 and DV8 options are really good. But I don't think that they're particularly great, especially by comparison to other nations and what they're fielding. For the tank destroyers, I think they're also pretty good. You get a lot of really cheap medium AT guns, mostly because you're paying for like DV7 open tops, you're paying for DV8. So they're all up gunned, sometimes by multiple steps, which is great. And in some cases, you also get access to the versatile special rules. So you can fire them either as a medium anti-tank gun or as a light howitzer, which in my conversation with Tiberius that we had when talking about the Japanese, just means that, if you find that you're in an area of the battlefield that has a lot of infantry, or if you're facing an army that decided to just leave all of the armored vehicles at home, it could be really nice to be able to say, well, right now I'm firing with a pen plus 5, but next turn I might be able to fire with a 2 inch HE template with a pen plus 2, right? And so that's kind of nice. And then kind of lumped into this category because I didn't really have another good category for it because this is just such a unique vehicle. We have the Sasaki Armored Work Vehicle. And this is it's that engineering vehicle. It's very light, okay? This is not particularly, durable, but it has a forward-facing flamethrower, a left-facing flamethrower, and a right-facing flamethrower. You can only fire one every turn, but it means you have 3 flamethrowers. Now, the jury is out, and there are questions about, okay, if I run out of fuel, do I run out of fuel with all of them? My read on the situation is that we would have a special rule in there that would tell us if these should be treated as 1 flamethrower for the purposes of running out of fuel as opposed to 3. Considering the fact that the Germans have had a 2 flamethrower half-track vehicle for over a year now, and we haven't seen an errata update on that one, even though almost every time the erratas come out, there's one more errata FAQ thing that's added to the Germans, basically every time. The fact they haven't touched it and it hasn't come up yet makes me think probably not. And so I'm going to say 3 different flamethrowers, each tied to their own fuel cell, and each of those would have to go dry in order for it to actually be out of fuel. Which means if you want to run a flamethrower vehicle, this is the kind of flamethrower vehicle you would want to run. Now, admittedly, they're so small, they count as infantry flamethrowers. They only have 6-inch range instead of a 12-inch range, right? It affects, damage output, things like that. But it means that when one runs out, it just means you might need to turn your vehicle. But otherwise, you'd still get to flamethrower things if you want to. And in a game where it's so finicky now, where on a 1 or a 2, you run out of fuel and you can't use that flamethrower anymore, the value that you get on such a cheap, it's only like 105, 110 points. The fact that you can get reliable flame going for most of the game, if not all the game, is really, really good. From a self-propelled gun perspective, it hurts me to say this because I do love the Horo. I just love 155mm style guns. This one gets a poor rating. The Horo is the only self-propelled gun that they get. It is damage value 7, open-topped, and yet it is still almost 180 points. It's 175 points, which is a lot. And partially that's just because of the fact that heavy howitzers just took a nosedive this edition, which kind of sucks. I don't think they had to be hit as hard as they did, but it does mean that until that happens, Horo is, like, it's effective when it hits, don't get me wrong. It's not particularly efficient for the points you're spending. It's quite expensive, okay? You have anti-air platforms. These are fine. You get access to an AA truck with 1 AA gun. That's the only thing you get. And unlike in previous editions, and I believe even the rule book, there's no option to field this with 2 light autocannons on the back of that truck. It's only 1, which means, considering it has stationary firing platforms so you can't advance, move, and then shoot with it, there's not a lot of reasons to run one of these over a similarly costed traditional anti-aircraft gun with a single light autocannon, but with like 5 people on it. There's not a lot of reason to do that. So, like, it's fine. If you need flak protection, because flak protection is definitely a thing, and you didn't want to run some of the flak options in the artillery platoon, maybe you didn't have points for an artillery platoon because of other stuff you were running, then, like, you can technically run these. They're fine. I don't think they're particularly great, but they're okay. Okay. And then you have the armored cars. These are good. You get access to the Type 87 and Type 92. I think those are perfectly fine armored cars. The biggest issue that their armored cars have is that a lot of them have access to light machine guns or just a single machine gun of some kind, whether it's a medium machine gun or a light machine gun or whatever. And it just means the volume is not good. For the amount of points you're paying, you're not going to get a lot of value out of it. You're going to do some pins, but that's really all that you're going to do. And you're not doing it for as cheap as other people do. Now, it's worth noting that I believe they have an old version of the Renault FT17. And the Renault FT17 is quite good. Okay. Mostly because of the fact that, again, you're only paying like 30, 40 points or whatever in order to get yourself a fully enclosed DV7 machine gun, right? Which is great. But remember, that is not in the armored car section. That is in the tank section. And this is also part of my problem with most of the armored cars is why would I run an armored car which takes up an armored platoon slot when I could run basically an old outdated Renault FT17, which is slightly harder to run off the board when it fails an order test, and it's slightly more efficient at moving into different types of terrain, and is pretty darn cheap. So just a thing to think about, okay, when considering it. And so, unsurprising to me, I already knew this was mostly going to be the case. 6 out of 19. And this is where Japan's going to start falling back. Newsflash, they would have to get a perfect score from here in order to beat the British. Everything would have to be excellent as we head into the final category. And as you can see from the chart, it is not. And so when looking at tows and transports, their soft, small transports, so, up to like 5 people, is actually pretty good. Mostly because you get access to a 4-man transport for 8 to 15 points, which is really good because you might be tempted to take, say, an officer with a 3-man flamethrower team instead of a 2-man flamethrower team like everybody else has to take. Or if you're not afraid of your transport coming in from outflank or from reserve or starting on the table and does not having to worry about it, you might put a 4-man flamethrower team inside of one of these transports, right? The Kurugane gives you an option for 4 men, which is really nice. Just having that extra spot for only 1 point more is not horrible. They also have a couple of soft, small transports on the tow side of things that have transport capacity that you can take for as small as 8 points inexperienced. with the prime mover, and yet it has transport capacity. So in my mind, like, I mean, that's phenomenally good. And then when looking at your soft, larger transports, these are also pretty good. I mean, you get, normal stuff that everybody gets. You get up to 13 man transport capacity, which is nice because, again, you do have some larger squads, and it is always nice to be able to fit in like a 12-man squad of something plus an officer. Most people cap out at 12. You also have amphibious options, so they do get choices on better mobility, which is always nice. And then when it comes to the armored small carriers, these are also really good. You get access to things like the So-Da carrier, which is 6 men, damage value 7 for only 33 points. Right? I mean, that's 2 points more than a Stuart Kangaroo, but you can fit a whole lot more different kinds of things inside of it than you can a Stuart Kangaroo. Right? I mean, once again, just going back to it, you could fit a 5-man squad or a 5-man team alongside an officer, which is a really, really good hit squad right there. You have armored large carriers like the Hoha and the Hoki. You can get up to transport 24 off of this for smaller than the Landwasser Schlepper, which only has a transport capacity of 20 and is soft-skinned. It's only DV6. It isn't DV7, right? The biggest thing, though, about these is the fact that there's no mandatory gun. Because especially if you want to take them inexperienced just to transport and caddy people around, the gun isn't going to be hitting anything anyway. If you were getting an LMG, it's really not going to hit anything because you're only going to get 2 shots, right? Even with an MMG, 3 shots is not that reliable, especially if you take a pin. And so the fact that you don't have to buy it if you don't want to just saves you points on on your bottom line, which is really, really good. And then finally, their toes are excellent, not only because you get the 8-point horse-drawn limber and the 6-point mule, you get access to an 8-point damage value 6 prime mover, which is twice as durable as a horse-drawn limber for the exact same number of points. It is admittedly not wheeled, so you don't get doubled movement on roads. But then again, like 9 to 18 inches on a prime mover, and it has transport capacity, so you can carry men in it instead of just being able to tow around stuff. It's far more useful. And so, on the whole, I think their tows are some of the best in the game. They also get access to the 6-point inexperienced mule, which can be a pain in the butt to use. Mules often are, just the way of things. On the other hand, I mean, it's a tiny order dice from a footprint perspective that only costs you 6 points. It's not horrible, right? And so, as we close it out with 72 points out of 100, a perfectly good score, an excellent score for the Japanese military. And so when we're looking at best choices, I'm leaning toward paratroopers and SNLF infantry as the way that I'm planning on going for my approach. In terms of teams, I'm looking at the AT teams, maybe the mortar teams. Machine guns look interesting just because they're so cheap as a way of being able to put a good kind of holding unit on stuff. And then you get access to flamethrowers and snipers, and maybe those are worth taking. I don't know. I'm gonna play around with some stuff. I'll play around some flamethrowers and an engineering thing because you can use the Suzuki armored vehicle in an engineering platoon. So you could have 5 tankettes or whatever in your armor platoon. And as long as you have your 2 mandatory engineers, the other engineer infantry sections can be those Suzuki work vehicles. So could have a lot of armored vehicles if you really want to. I love the anti-aircraft guns. You can get 2 to 3 of them. Right? 2 to 3 light autocannons on a single mount, which is awesome. You have versatile howitzers, which is kind of fun and interesting. I'm going to play around with them. And maybe play around with some spigot mortars. I mean, they're just kind of cool. And we'll see how those go. I don't know if I'm going to like them because, again, it's only pen plus 1. So it's not like they're doing a lot of damage, but it's a big template. So that's always nice. I like the tank destroyers an awful lot. I like the Kaishinoto Chiha. The tankettes are also pretty good, and I'm open on the armored cars because I have found the benefit of being able to swing around and then suddenly hit stuff from really close up when they weren't expecting it. You can't get a light AT gun, I don't think, on any of those, which is one of my biggest drawbacks. So being able to just rush up really quick and then just pound into the side armor of an armored vehicle when they aren't expecting it and getting like a pen plus 6 is not possible. But yeah, I mean, I'll play around with them and just see what I can find. And then you've got the Hoha carriers and the So-Da carriers if you need to be able to transport stuff around. You also have the prime mover in case you want to really just save yourself some points. And you're cool with running something that isn't armored. And so I think for your best platoons, your rifle platoons and your heavy weapons platoons are where it's at. I think that's where you're going to be starting. And then your artillery platoon, I think, is a really good choice after that. And then maybe, surprisingly, the engineering platoon maybe aces out the armor platoon. Possibly. Recce is kind of here and there, right? I mean, your infantry are really good. It gives you access to some good teams. Again, it's a relatively cheap way to be able to run another air observer if you want to do those. So I think it's fine. I do wonder, depending on how aggressive you're playing, whether you're going to need Recce on the transports. So I don't know. I go back and forth on it. I could see the Recce platoon also being a really, really good choice for Japan. And so as we come to the end, Japan finishes number 4. They were only 1 point behind the Germans, only 3 points behind the British, who are sitting at number 1, and a healthy 10 points above the Soviet Union. Now, this is not to say that if you play against the Soviet Union with Japan, you're going to win. I'll say this, Japan has the tools to make it very difficult for a Soviet army to function. However, again, from an options perspective, I think this is fair. I think that Japan has a wider range of useful options than the Soviets do, mostly because I think that their team weapons and their artillery choices especially are much better than the Soviets. Armor is going to be a little stronger in the hands of the Soviet Union. Anti-armor is pretty darn strong in the side of Japan. So, I think you could have a very interesting scrum there. And so next on our list, we're going to be looking at Italy. Once again, we'll be waiting to do our review until after I've seen whatever errata is going to drop with whenever it releases. I'm going to try to keep these again coming out to roughly when people are actually getting the books. Because, I don't want to spoil everything for you guys. I don't want it to be a spoiler thing. I want you guys to be able to enjoy the book, read through it, and then come back and see what I noticed and see if there was anything else that you added. And so toward that end, was there anything in particular that I missed? Obviously, I didn't try to go blow by blow through everything in the army list. But is there something that really stood out to you? Anything interesting that you've never run before that you're really excited to try out? Or are you just kind of curious now and thinking about starting a Japanese army for the first time? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.